Chapter 231 Another Task. The receptionist spared him a glance before sitting up. Though he dressed simple, the air that lingered around Michael made the receptionist, who had initially planned to do her tasks throughout the night lazily, take him more seriously. Looking to report a completed quest, take a new one, or something else? The receptionist inquired, bring Michael, who was observing his surroundings, out of it. Surprisingly, the guild was still very much active even at this time of the day. Michael didn't know if it was an illusion or something caused by the meeting together of a few click boxes, but the guild seemed to be even more active now than it was in the morning. Michael wondered if this was normal or there were others like him who came to submit their task or take new ones. Michael returned his focus to the receptionist. Both, Michael answered. The receptionist nodded and reached for a stack of papers, flipping through them as she spoke. "What task did you take?" she asked, her tone more businesslike now. "A subjugation mission. A notorious bandit group has been raiding villages along the trade routes," Michael replied. The receptionist's fingers paused for a moment before she pulled out a file. "Your name?" "Mike Nor." Her eyes flickered toward him briefly before scanning the document. After a few seconds, she nodded. "I see. You accepted this mission yesterday." Michael remained silent as she skimmed the details, her expression neutral. "Guild regulations state that mission completions need to be verified," she continued, setting the file aside. "We'll need at most 2 days to confirm that the bandits have been dealt with. You should return around that time to claim your reward." Michael gave a small nod. "Understood." Michael couldn't help but note the process. The guild took time to verify completions, likely through scouts or informants, which meant that if he had proof himself, the process would be much quicker. This realization made him recall his suspicions that bringing undeniable evidence might be the key to receiving faster rewards in the future. For now, all he could do was wait. Michael remained in place, his gaze settling back on the receptionist. "Can you tell me what tasks are available?" The receptionist paused in thought, tapping her fingers lightly against the desk before reaching for another stack of papers. "I can," she said, her voice carrying a subtle shift in tone. As she flipped through the documents, her expression remained composed, but internally, she was surprised. The task Michael had submitted, taking down an entire bandit group, wasn't something that should have been given to a solo hunter, especially not one at Iron rank. What was the previous receptionist thinking when they approved this for him? She wondered. Either they were careless, or they had seen something in Michael that justified such a decision. Her fingers slowed as a new thought settled in. If he had actually completed that task alone, then his strength was far beyond the typical Iron rank hunter. That changed things. She started selecting better-suited tasks, ones that required more experience, skill, or power. Surprisingly, there were far more tasks available than there had been the previous day. Michael noticed the difference immediately. The board had seemed somewhat lacking before, but now, there were numerous missions, each varying in difficulty and type. It made sense. If tasks were completed, new ones had to take their place. The receptionist cleared her throat and began listing the available tasks aloud, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity as she glanced at Michael. "First, we have a beast hunt. A pack of Nightfang wolves has been attacking livestock near the outskirts. The request is to either cull their numbers or eliminate their pack leader. It's a frequent issue, and the request has been marked urgent by the local farmers." She flipped to the next page. "Second, an escort mission. A merchant caravan is departing for a neighboring town, but there have been recent monster sightings along the route. Hunters are needed to ensure a safe journey. The YA is decent, but it's more about patience and readiness than direct combat, most times." Michael listened in silence as she continued. "Next, a nest clearing. A group of stone serpents has settled inside an abandoned mine, preventing workers from returning. The creatures need to be driven out or exterminated. The client is the mining guild, and they are offering bonuses based on how thoroughly the job is handled. She tapped the next sheet, then hesitated slightly before reading. There's also an investigation request. A village near the riverbank has reported multiple disappearances. No confirmed sightings of monsters, but tracks indicate large creatures may be responsible. The village head is looking for hunters to either solve the mystery or deal with the threat. Michael took note of the tasks, quickly assessing the risks and rewards of each. The receptionist gave him a moment before adding, "There are others, but based on what you handled last time, these seem the most fitting. If you are strong enough to handle a bandit group alone, you'll likely find these within your capability." Michael caught the slight emphasis in her tone. She was testing him, trying to gauge his real strength. He let out a breath, then glanced over the tasks again. Michael weighed his options, his thoughts moving quickly as he considered each task. The beast hunt seemed straightforward. If he went after the pack leader, the rest would likely scatter, making the job easier. One thing he particularly loved about the task was that they involved monsters. Why? Chapter 232 Progress. Of course, with the day as dead as the night, there was no way Michael would leave the capital to head to a location he wasn't familiar with. If he had any intention of leaving the moment he submitted his task, he wouldn't have let Leah and Ace search for a place to stay the night. Michael had no plans to step outside the capital tonight, even if he could. The reason was simple. It was time to log back into Aurora. Michael returned to the inn, ignoring the looks around him. The moment he entered his room, he moved to the uncomfortable wooden bed and summoned an ORC Shen along with a male armored RC that, for once, didn't reek of blood. Then, he connected his consciousness back to his body in Aurora. Since it was nighttime in the land of origin, it was far past midnight in Aurora. However, what Michael didn't expect was to hear Aunt Mia's voice the moment he opened his eyes. He hadn't intended to listen in on whatever she was saying, but with his sharp hearing, he picked up part of the conversation before he could withdraw his senses. And it just so happened to be something that interested him, making him subconsciously continue listening. After a few more seconds, he grasped the gist of it. It seemed Aunt Mia already had a place for them and was simply speaking to the person who would transport their belongings. The news both surprised and satisfied Michael. Aunt Mia's efficiency was commendable. Without hesitation, he stood up, dismissed the undead in the room with him, and stepped out. Michael stepped into the dimly lit hall and made his way toward the main room. The moment he entered, his gaze landed on Aunt Mia, who sat at the table, her expression weary. Despite the exhaustion evident in her posture, she was still engaged in conversation with someone on the phone. Michael's eyes then shifted slightly to the side, where two familiar figures stood silently, Lily and Beginning. His two undead remained close. Beginning's hollow gaze was fixed forward, his hands neatly folded in front of him. Lily leaned against the wall, idly playing with a strand of her hair. Neither of them spoke, but Michael could tell they were paying attention. Something about them felt a little off to him, though. For one, Lily was oddly girlish. A girlish ORC. The sight was jarring in Michael's mind. Then there was Beginning. It radiated an aura of sheer will, focus, and determination. Very serious. Something Michael realized wasn't common even for an undead. Michael exhaled lightly. His undead were starting to develop their own personalities, and out of all of them, he felt like he owed Beginning the most. Once one of his strongest, Beginning had now fallen behind the others, not because of weakness, but because it had been left behind to protect his family during the recent chaos, while the rest of his undead had leveled up from fighting the invading monsters. If Beginning could express its thoughts, Michael had a feeling it wouldn't be satisfied. Michael approached the table quietly, only speaking once he was close enough. "Aunt Mia," he called. Aunt Mia, who has just gotten off the phone, focused on Michael. "Michael, you were awake." Michael gave a small nod. "I heard a little of what you were saying." You found a place already. Aunt Mia sighed, rubbing her temples. Yes. It's nothing fancy, but it'll do for now. The owner was reluctant at first, but after some persuasion, they agreed to rent it to us. As for buying, probably a little later. Michael raised a brow at that but didn't question it. How soon can we move? The arrangements are already being handled, Aunt Mia said. The person I was just on the phone with just now is in charge of transporting our belongings. By Monday, everything should be settled. Monday was 2 days away, which satisfied Michael. It meant he had enough time to prepare and ensure he was available. In just a few hours, he would have to meet with Mage for their appointment, something he had no intention of missing. Fortunately, tomorrow wasn't the day. Michael nodded, glancing at Aunt Mia's tired expression. The dark circles under her eyes and the slight slump in her shoulders didn't go unnoticed. You should rest, he said, his tone firm. You've been running around all day handling things. There's no need to push yourself any further tonight. Aunt Mia waved a dismissive hand, a small smile playing on her lips. I'm fine, Michael. Really? He frowned but remained silent, clearly unconvinced. I just want us to move sooner rather than later, she continued. The faster we settle in, the better. Besides, you should be worrying about yourself instead of me. I can handle the little things just fine. Michael had a frown on his face but said something. Eventually, under the smile of Aunt Mia, he could only exhale in acceptance. At least try to get some sleep, he said after a pause. Pushing too hard won't help anyone. I could say the same to you, she shot back. Michael shook his head, a faint smirk on his lips. Fair enough. Aunt Mia chuckled softly but didn't push further. As the brief moment of silence settled between them, Aunt Mia shifted slightly in her chair before looking back at Michael. By the way, have you contacted your friends? Michael frowned slightly. Which ones? He couldn't remember anyone he could call a friend, so he was puzzled. The 3 who came looking for you 2 days ago, Aunt Mia said. They stopped by to check on you, but I told them you weren't around. I didn't want anyone disturbing you while you rested. A look of realization immediately appeared on Michael's face. Aunt Mia had already informed him about this before, but as he didn't take the matter of Mira, Lillian and the unfamiliar last person seriously, he had forgotten. For a moment he wondered if he should message Mira. Nah. I haven't contacted them yet, Michael admitted. But I will soon. Aunt Mia nodded in approval. Good. It's always good to have people who care. To this, Michael merely nodded and exchanged a few more words with Aunt Mia. Chapter 233, A King? Once their conversation wrapped up, Michael returned to his room. He closed the door behind him and let out a quiet breath, his mind already shifting to his next course of action. However, before summoning another undead to guard him while his consciousness was in the land of origin, he hesitated. A thought crossed his mind. He had planned to visit the Supers Association branch. The cracks in the sky were still there, but they barely emitted any chaotic energy now, a stark contrast to before. Something had changed. Michael suspected the Federation had taken action, though he wasn't sure what exactly they had done. He pondered for a moment, weighing his options. In the end, he decided it was worth checking out, but only briefly. He had no intention of wasting time. If he couldn't find Brian, he would head straight back home. With his mind made up, Michael turned on his communicator and checked the time. It was already late, but the Supers Association was always active. He grabbed his jacket, adjusted his clothes, and, with one last glance at his room, stepped out into the night through his window. The cool night air greeted him as he landed soundlessly on the deserted street. Michael's sharp gaze swept across the surroundings, taking in the eerie stillness. The city, once teeming with life, now bore the scars of recent destruction. Cracked roads, collapsed buildings, and scattered debris painted a grim picture of what had transpired. Michael didn't linger. With a slight flex of his legs, he vanished into a blur, dashing through the ruins at inhuman speed. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows over the wreckage. The wind howled between the skeletal remains of buildings. As he moved, Michael's mind remained sharp, cataloging every detail. Some buildings still stood but bore deep cracks, their foundations barely holding together. The roads were uneven, marred by craters left behind by the battle. However, compared a few days ago, he saw no bodies, human or monster. The association must have cleaned up all the remains by now. Despite his speed, Michael's steps remained silent, his senses stretched outward for any sign of movement. He didn't stop. There was no reason to. His destination was clear. Soon, in just a few seconds, Michael arrived at the Supers Association branch. The building stood tall and imposing, its exterior still bearing the marks of the recent battle. Michael slowed his pace as he approached, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding area. The association was still active, just as he had expected. Even this late at night, people moved in and out of the building. Michael didn't concern himself with the details and stepped through the entrance without hesitation. The interior of the association was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the city outside. The hum of conversation filled the air as personnel moved with purpose. Ignoring the glances sent his way, Michael made his way toward the trade center. His pace was steady but deliberate. He had no intention of wasting time. However, when he reached the counter where Brian usually stood, he was met with an unfamiliar face. A woman, likely in her early 30s, looked up at him as he approached. She had sharp features, short dark hair, and an air of quiet authority about her. Michael didn't recognize her. "You're looking for someone?" she asked, her voice even. "Teacher Brian," Michael said simply. "He's usually the one handling things here." The woman's expression remained neutral. "King Brian is no longer in Woodstone City." Michael frowned at the way she addressed him. King Brian. That was unexpected. He had never heard anyone refer to Brian in such a way. The title itself was strange. He had only ever known the older man as Teacher Brian. Michael's sharp mind instantly caught onto something. King. His thoughts came to a sudden halt as his eyes widened in realization. He didn't dare assume. Instead, he asked, "What's his rank?" The woman gave a small smile, as if amused by his surprise. "He's a king rank expert now. All king rank experts must be referred to as king, just as master and cultivators are called master. It's a matter of respect." Michael processed the information, his thoughts running at high speed. So Brian had advanced. It made sense now. The strength he had seen in the older man. It was clear that Brian was no ordinary individual. But to think he had reached king rank, that was a level far beyond what Michael had expected. So was that blue figure indeed Brian? A memory came to Michael's head, but he shook it a second later. He kept his expression calm, though internally, he reevaluated what he knew about the man. Still, none of this changed anything for him. Brian wasn't here. That meant whatever business Michael had would have to wait. He didn't feel free enough to ask anyone else around. "I'll just search through the forum," Michael decided. With a brief nod, he turned away from the counter. There was no point in lingering any longer. However, just as he was about to leave, the woman spoke again. "If you're looking for assistance with something, I can help," she offered. Michael glanced back at her, considering. For a moment, he debated whether to ask for information regarding Brian's whereabouts, but ultimately, he decided against it. He had no reason to go searching for the man. "It's nothing urgent," he said simply. "I'll handle it myself." Without another word, he left the trade center. Michael stepped back out into the night, his thoughts still lingering on what he had just learned. The city remained quiet, the remnants of destruction serving as a silent reminder of the recent chaos. He exhaled lightly, refocusing. There was no point in dwelling on it. Right now, there were other things to do. It didn't take long for Michael to return to his room. However, after closing the windows, he didn't immediately attempt to return to the land of origin. Instead, he brought out his phone. Chapter 234 Interesting Potion. Michael sat down on his bed and unlocked his phone, his fingers moving with practiced ease as he navigated to the Supers Association forum. It had been a few days since he had last logged in. As the page loaded, a flood of new posts filled his screen. The forum was as active as ever. A few front-page posts caught his attention. How to make an organ enlargement potion, safe and effective. Breaking past the elite rank. The key to advancing. Federation's latest action against the cracks. What we know so far. Michael's eyelids twitched at the first post. He stared at the bold title, his mind blank for a second. Then, before he could stop himself, his thumb tapped the screen. A mistake. It was definitely a mistake. Michael refused to acknowledge any other possibility. A wall of text and images loaded instantly. The first line reading. Many think size is determined at birth, but with alchemy, even fate can be rewritten. Michael blinked. His grip on the phone tightened slightly. He should close it immediately. But his eyes moved down despite himself, scanning the ingredients list. Requires the liver of a rank 3 bone python, the petals of a midnight orchid, and... Michael caught himself and quickly exited the post. A deep silence filled the room. He exhaled through his nose, locking his phone with a flick of his thumb. It's time to enter the land of origin, he muttered to himself, as if to wash away the previous moment from existence. Of course he didn't do this. After all, he had come for something else instead. This post had just... Michael shook his head and went back to the front page. He clicked on the third post that had also gotten his attention and what he had logged in for in the first place. The post loaded quickly, revealing a detailed breakdown of the Federation's latest actions. Federation's latest action against the cracks. What we know so far. By Level 4. The Federation has deployed high-ranking experts to stabilize the largest remaining cracks. Reports indicate that a special containment team, led by a King rank expert, has successfully sealed multiple rift points in major cities. However, sources suggest that the cracks have not been entirely neutralized, merely suppressed. While the cracks no longer pose an immediate danger, they haven't been truly dealt with. The Federation's silence regarding the long-term consequences is concerning. Stay alert. Michael leaned back slightly, absorbing the information. So the Federation had acted. That explained the change in the sky. The cracks were still there but weakened, no longer pouring out chaotic energy. However, if the Federation had only suppressed them instead of closing them entirely, that meant the danger wasn't over. Michael frowned slightly. His gaze drifted back to the account name. The level alone was already surprising. It meant the person was either a rank 3 Awakener or a King rank cultivator, an elite powerhouse in either case. But something still didn't sit right with him. The Federation had the power to suppress the cracks but not close them completely. That was odd. Shouldn't they have been able to eliminate the threat entirely? Michael's mind spun with possibilities. Either the cracks were beyond even the Federation's control, or they had a reason for leaving them open. His eyes narrowed slightly. The demonic supernaturals had been the ones responsible for the chaos, but their motives remained unclear. Michael significantly. Was their goal to let something through? Or had this simply been a test of the Federation's strength? Michael wasn't arrogant enough to believe he could uncover the truth on his own. He clicked on the comments section, quickly scanning through the replies. Some were dismissive. If the Federation's handling it, then there's nothing to worry about. Just go back to training. Others were more skeptical. Suppressed. That just means the problem is delayed, not solved. What happens if the cracks open again? Anyone else notice the Federation has been moving some certain ways lately? First, it was exposing the supernatural world bit by bit a few days ago. Michael exhaled through his nose. He had already suspected as much, but seeing others echo his thoughts made it clear he wasn't the only one wary of the situation. Still, there was no immediate action he could take. His fingers tapped against the side of his phone as he considered his next move. For now, there was no point in dwelling on what he couldn't change. Michael exited the forum and locked his phone. He had one last thing to do before entering the land of origin. Standing up, he extended his hand, summoning an undead. "Stand guard," he instructed. The undead remained motionless, awaiting further orders. Satisfied, Michael laid back down on his bed, closing his eyes. A familiar sensation washed over him as his consciousness drifted away, and the world of the land of origin welcomed him once more. A pair of green eyes opened, and Michael found himself once again in the room of the inn he had rented the night for. So uncomfortable. Michael commented on his wooden bed and sat up. Michael sat up, rubbing his neck. The wooden bed was stiff and uncomfortable, making his body ache slightly despite his enhanced physique. He let out a small groan and stretched before glancing around the dimly lit room. Everything was as he had left it. His undead still stood motionless in the corner, its airy form blending with the shadows. Michael's thoughts drifted for a moment. He had done everything he needed to for now. The Federation's movements, the cracks in the sky, and Brian's unexpected advancement to king rank were all things to keep in mind, but none of them required his immediate attention. At least, not yet. Feeling idle, he exhaled through his nose and closed his eyes. He shifted into lotus position, his mind settling as he prepared to meditate. His cultivation technique was bad, barely effective. It provided him with little actual improvement, but at least the process was comfortable. A side thought crossed his mind. I should look for a better meditation technique. The one he was using was likely something low-grade. He had never put much effort into seeking a superior method, but now, with his growing ambitions, it seemed foolish to continue like this. For now, though, he let that thought drift away. Slowly, he focused on his breathing. The room was silent, save for the faint movements of his undead, and soon, Michael fell into deep meditation. Morning arrived without him realizing it. Today was the day he had an appointment with Mage. Michael ignored the panels in front of him and went to clean up. After washing up and changing into a fresh set of clothes, Michael stepped out of his room and made his way downstairs. The inn was already bustling with activity. The scent of freshly baked bread and simmering broth filled the air, mixing with the low hum of conversation from the other patrons. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, spotted Michael and immediately straightened his posture. His eyes held a trace of respect as he greeted him. "Good morning, sir," the innkeeper said with a nod. "Would you like breakfast? We have fresh porridge, eggs, and some smoked meat today." Michael gave a slight nod. "I'll take whatever is ready." "Of course." The innkeeper hurried away, and within moments, a steaming bowl of porridge and a plate of smoked meat was placed before him. Michael ate in silence, his thoughts already focused on his upcoming meeting with Mage. Once he finished, he placed a few coins on the counter and stood up. The innkeeper gave him a respectful nod but didn't say anything further. Michael returned to his room and closed the door behind him, exhaling slightly. He had returned for a reason. He was waiting for the day to brighten more and for Ace and Leah to arrive. As Michael waited, he took a moment to collect his thoughts. He had a busy day ahead of him, with his appointment with Mage being the main priority. Michael's gaze drifted toward the window, where the morning sunlight was slowly creeping in. He watched as the dust particles danced in the rays of light, his mind momentarily at ease. However, his tranquility was short-lived. as his thoughts soon turned to the tasks at hand. He heard a faint knock at the door. Michael made his way to the door and opened it. He found Ace and Leah standing in the hallway. They both seemed brighter than they were yesterday. Michael figured that they must have had a great sleep. The two bowed in greeting, but before they could speak, Michael beat them to it. "I won't be available today to be with you, but I need you both to do something for me." Immediately, a look of surprise appeared on the two youths' faces as they turned to look at each other. Chapter 235, Day of Appointment. Michael stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on Ace and Leah. "I have a task for you both," he said, his voice firm but controlled. Ace and Leah exchanged a brief glance before nodding in unison. "Yes, sir," Ace asked, his voice bright and attentive. Michael's gaze narrowed slightly. "I'm interested in purchasing a house in the outer city. Can you tell me more about the available options?" This idea had come to Michael earlier in the day. One should not forget that, thanks to the bandits, Michael was far from broke. The thought had first crossed his mind in a funny way. He had realized that not only was he wealthy in Aurora, but his wealth seemed to follow him in the land of origin as well. And when he considered that he was moving to another area in Aurora, the idea naturally followed. Why not get his own place? Michael wasn't sure how much houses cost in this world, but the chests of silver, along with one containing gold coins, made him confident. He doubted he could afford anything in the inner city, where a single meal likely cost a commoner's monthly income, but getting a place in the outer city should be possible. As for why the bandits had so much money yet still looked poor, Michael suspected they had only recently acquired their wealth. The existence of the health potions in their stash seemed to hint at that. Leah's expression remained cold and distant. "There are a few areas in the outer city where nobles can purchase houses, sir. The Golden District, the Silver District, and the Copper District are the most popular areas," Ace added, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "But, sir, the Golden District is the most expensive area. The houses there are luxurious and well-maintained, but they come with a hefty price tag." Michael's eyes flicked to Ace, his expression unreadable. "What about the Silver District?" he asked, his voice neutral. Leah's voice was detached, but informative. "The Silver District is a bit more affordable than the Golden District, sir. The houses there are still well-maintained, but they are not as luxurious. It's a popular area for nobles who want a comfortable but not overly extravagant lifestyle." Ace chimed in, his voice full of excitement. "And the Copper District, sir. It's the most affordable area, but the houses there can be a bit rough around the edges. However, it's a great option for nobles who want to invest in a property without breaking the bank." Michael's gaze lingered on Ace and Leah, his expression thoughtful. "I want you both to look into these areas and find suitable properties for me. Report back to me tonight or tomorrow morning at the ground floor of the inn." Leah nodded, his expression still cold and distant. "Yes, sir. We'll take care of it," Ace responded cheerfully. "Don't worry, sir. We'll find the perfect property for you." As they turned to leave, Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze lingering on the two youths. He could sense the difference in their attitudes, Leah's cold detachment and Ace's bright enthusiasm. It was an interesting dynamic, one that Michael did not intend to explore further. However, before the two could get further away, Michael stopped them. As he spoke, he reached into his coat and retrieved the silver coins from his storage space. Unlike before, he was no longer spending what Mage Lian had given him. This was his own earnings from the bandits. "You take this, and you take this." He handed each of them a coin, his tone firm but calm. "I know you still have plenty left from the supplies we gathered, so keep it. This is your reward for your obedience, which has satisfied me. Continue like this, and there will be more in the future." Michael believed in the stick-and-carrot approach. From what he understood about this world, there was little chance they would try to escape. But people didn't always stay just because they were forced to. Sometimes, even in unfavorable situations, they remained because they believed it was worth it. It felt manipulative, maybe even toxic, but Michael didn't feel guilty. He knew he hadn't mistreated them. If anything, this was just ensuring that their loyalty, or at least their efficiency, remained intact. After giving them their reward, Michael dismissed them with a casual wave of his hand. Ace bowed deeply, a smile stretching across his face. "Thank you, sir. We'll make sure to find the best options for you." Leah nodded with a complicated expression on his face. "Understood." Michael watched as they turned and disappeared down the hallway. Once they were gone, he closed the door and exhaled, rubbing his temples. With that matter settled, he shifted his focus back to his main priority for the day, his meeting with Mage. According to Mage, all Michael needed to do was visit any noble house with the token, and they would arrange for him to meet with Mage. A moment later, he stepped out of his room, descending the staircase of the inn and heading straight for the entrance. The streets outside were already bustling with life. Merchants called out their wares, commoners hurried about their daily tasks, and the occasional armored patrol moved through the crowd, their presence maintaining order. Michael's pace remained steady as he navigated through the streets, heading toward the gate of the inner city. The inner gate wasn't hard to locate, and with the token in his hand, gaining access inside wasn't difficult for Michael either. However, once inside, he found himself a little lost. He knew he needed to head toward a noble house, but the issue was that he didn't know any. Ace and Leah wouldn't have been able to help either, as they had never stepped into the inner city in their entire lives. In the end, Michael decided to try his luck by going deeper into the city, searching for the large houses with insignia flags. During his last visit, he had taken note of a few. If anything could be called a noble house, it had to be these establishments. Chapter 236. Their Thoughts. As Michael ventured deeper into the inner city, he noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. He saw nobles and their attendants hurrying about, their fine clothes and jewelry a stark contrast to the more modest attire of the commoners in the outer city. Michael's eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for the large houses with insignia flags. He had seen a few during his last visit, and he hoped to find one now. After a few minutes of walking, he spotted a grand estate in the distance. The house was massive, with tall spires and intricate stonework. A flag bearing the insignia of a golden sword fluttered in the breeze. Michael's gaze locked onto the estate, and he quickened his pace. He approached the entrance, where the guards stood at attention. They eyed Michael warily, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. "Halt," one of the guards said. "State your business." Michael held out the token, and the guard's expressions changed. Though he appeared calm on the surface, Michael couldn't help but feel nervous as his mind was all over the place about what to do. To this moment, he still had his doubts about the token Madeleine had handed him. With his experience, he knew it was very valuable, but it also showed that it was only those who could recognize it who knew of its importance. When they didn't know, it seemed worthless. However, Michael didn't expect that the token seemed to be useful even inside the inner city. The guards of the house he chose on random actually recognized the token. The guards exchanged a brief glance, and then one of them nodded. "Welcome, Sid," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "We've been expecting you. Please, follow me." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, his mind racing with questions. Expecting him? How did they know he was coming? Michael didn't have time to think as the guard led him through the estate, navigating a series of opulent corridors and chambers. The guard led Michael through the estate, navigating a series of opulent corridors and chambers. They finally arrived at a large wooden door, adorned with intricate carvings. The guard knocked twice, and a voice from within bade them enter. The guard pushed open the door, revealing a lavish study. A few days ago, a wave of curiosity swept through the inner city. The attendant of Grand Mage Lian had visited several noble houses, delivering a message that sparked whispers and speculation. The attendant's words were brief but intriguing. A young man would soon arrive, carrying a token that would grant him an audience with Grand Mage Lian. The noble houses were instructed to receive the young man with respect and arrange for him to meet with the Grand Mage immediately. Most of the nobles who received the message was particularly intrigued. They had no idea what to expect from this young man or what made him so important to Grand Mage Lian. The lack of information only added to the mystery, and they found themselves wondering if he would be the one to receive the young man. As the days passed, the initial excitement began to wane, replaced by confusion and skepticism. Some nobles started to wonder if the young man would ever arrive, while others speculated that he might have already visited another noble house, and they had chosen to keep it secret. However, Michael, the cause of the matter, knew nothing of this and was currently staring at the old man in front of him. Ace and Leah. Ace and Leah stepped out of the inn, the morning air crisp against their skin. The streets were already bustling with activity, merchants setting up their stalls and travelers passing through. Despite the familiar scene, neither of them felt entirely at ease. Michael's attitude toward them was strange. He wasn't like the nobles they had grown up fearing, those who sneered at commoners or saw them as disposable. But that didn't mean they could trust him. Ace adjusted the strap of his bag, glancing sideways at Leah. "He's different, huh?" he muttered under his breath. Leah exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I don't know if that makes it better or worse." Ace hummed in agreement. They couldn't deny that Michael's presence was starting to change their impression of nobles, and that was unsettling in its own way. After a moment of silence, Leah finally asked, "How much silver do we have now?" Ace reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. "3, he said simply. "He gave us one last night, but we never spent it." Leah pressed his lips together, conflicted. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. "I hope he gets bored of us soon and lets us go." His words were firm, but there was hesitation in his voice. Because deep down, a part of him wondered, could they actually make enough coin by staying with Michael? Enough to enroll in a dojo and finally gain supernatural powers? Leah shook his head, forcing the thought away. He couldn't afford to entertain that kind of hope, especially when it came from working for a noble, a group he wanted to destroy. Though he had planned to use their money to gain power to destroy them, he didn't exactly like how it was currently going. Ace stuck the coins back into his pocket and gave Leah a sideways glance. "You think he'd really just let us go?" His voice was lighter, but the weight of the question lingered between them. Leah didn't answer right away. Instead, he focused on the path ahead, leading them toward the outer city's wealthier districts. The streets were wide and lined with more permanent shops rather than the temporary market stalls they were used to. The closer they got to their destination, the more refined the architecture became, nothing like the cramped alleys they had grown up in. "I don't know," Leah finally admitted. "He's not like the others, but that doesn't mean he's not dangerous." Ace smirked. "Yeah, but I get the feeling he's not planning to kill us in our sleep or anything. If anything, he might be the type who actually keeps his word." Leah frowned but didn't argue. They reached the Silver District first, where the homes were neat, well-maintained, and clearly meant for wealthy who wanted comfort without excess. Ace whistled as he looked around. "Not bad. If I had a pile of gold, I'd live here." Leah gave him a sharp look. "You're getting too comfortable with this," he muttered. Ace shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just thinking ahead. If we play this right, we could set ourselves up for something better than running and hiding all the time." Leah didn't respond. He wanted to argue, but the truth was, Ace had a point. They had survived by scraping by, taking whatever they could to make it another day. But working for Michael, even in the short time they'd known him, had already given them more than they'd ever had before. And that terrified Liam more than anything. "Come on," he said, pushing forward. "Let's find the best place we can. If we are going to do this, we might as well do it right." Ace grinned, falling into step beside him. "Now that's the spirit." With that, the two of them set off to complete their task, though each carried their own thoughts about what it truly meant for their future. Chapter 237 Syria. Michael stared at the old man in front of him. This time, he was seated. The guard from the gate had brought him to some kind of study to meet who Michael assumed was the steward of the noble house he had entered. At first, the steward had looked at him with puzzlement, addressing the guard beside him rather than Michael himself. The man wasn't disrespectful, but his gaze was dismissive. However, the moment he learned that Michael carried a royal court token, the first time Michael realized what the item Mage had given him truly was, the steward's attitude shifted drastically. His dismissiveness vanished, replaced by immediate and sincere respect. When he confirmed that Michael had come specifically for Mage, his deference only deepened. Fortunately, there was no unnecessary small talk. The steward promptly assured him that he would send someone to the core area of the capital to inform Mage of his presence. With how smoothly everything went, Michael was certain this was Mage handiwork. There was no way the old mage could have known which noble house he would choose, so the only logical explanation was that his presence had already been broadcasted to several noble houses to ensure his passage was unhindered. Michael's feelings on the matter were complicated. On one hand, he was glad everything had gone smoothly. But on the other, wasn't this attracting more attention than he wanted? A bit of recognition was fine, but he couldn't forget he was an outsider here, and his fake identity was particularly sensitive. A noble. His real bloodline had no connection to nobility, yet somehow, in this world, he had been labeled as one. Michael was concerned that if too many powerful figures started paying attention to him, the very identity that was granting him so many benefits now could end up being a liability in the future. That said, he wasn't worried. At the very least, he had never actually claimed to be a noble himself. Besides, a part of him believed that if he demonstrated impressive enough prowess, those who questioned his identity might instead offer him an even better one. Right now, Michael's focus was on the steward who had just returned to the study where he had left Michael to wait. However, he didn't come alone. He was accompanied by a young girl. Michael guessed she was about the same age as his cousin. No, she should be slightly older. She wore an expensive-looking gown that, while elegant, seemed uncomfortable to wear, or so Michael thought. Still, his attention remained on why she had been brought into the study. Was she the one who would lead him to Mage? "Sir Michael," then steward addressed, his voice carrying the practiced ease of someone used to formalities. "Allow me to introduce Lady Syria Golden, the youngest daughter of the Golden family." Michael's gaze flickered to the girl. Lady Syria. Golden family. He didn't recognize the name, but from the steward's tone, it was clearly an influential house. The girl, Syria, gave him a polite nod, her expression neutral but her sharp blue eyes studying him with open curiosity. She was young, maybe 17 or 18, with delicate features and long silver hair that was neatly tied back. Despite her youthful appearance, there was a confidence in the way she carried herself. Before Michael could question her presence, the steward continued. "In the time it takes for a response to arrive from the royal court, Lady Syria will keep you company." Michael's expression remained unreadable, but inwardly, he frowned. That wasn't necessary. He preferred to be left alone. He opened his mouth to decline, but before he could say a word, the steward had already stepped back and gave him a respectful nod. "Please excuse me, Sir Michael. If you need anything, The attendants outside will be at your disposal." Without waiting for a response, the old man turned on his heel and left the study, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. Michael stared at the door for a brief moment, before sighing lightly. The steward hadn't even given him a chance to refuse. Shifting his gaze back to the girl, he found Syria still watching him, her expression unreadable. A moment of silence stretched between them before she tilted her head slightly. "You don't seem particularly pleased," she noted. Michael met her gaze, his tone flat. "I wasn't expecting company." Syria gave a small, amused smile. "Neither was I." Michael raised a brow at that. "So you weren't told beforehand?" She shook her head. "Only that I was to keep you company. Nothing else." That confirmed it. She was just as much in the dark as he was about the reason behind this arrangement. Michael exhaled quietly, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Then I suppose we are both stuck here." Syria's lips twitched. "It would seem so." Another brief silence. Michael wasn't interested in unnecessary conversation, but at the same time, he knew it would be rude to completely ignore her. He wasn't looking for trouble with a noble family, especially one he knew nothing about. So after a moment, he simply asked, "Are you used to this?" Syria arched a brow. "Being assigned to entertain unexpected guests." Michael gave a slight nod. She chuckled. "Not particularly. But it's not the worst thing." Michael hummed in acknowledgement, but beyond that, he didn't say much. Syria, however, didn't seem bothered by his lack of enthusiasm. If anything, she appeared somewhat intrigued by his presence. The steward's decision hadn't been an attempt to make the noble daughter entertain a guest. It had been a calculated move by the head of the Golden Sword family. Syria's presence wasn't about simple courtesy. It was about making an impression. A stranger who carried a royal court token. Someone who personally knew a grand mage. And not just any grand mage, but one who openly displayed his importance to this person. That kind of individual wasn't ordinary. The head of the Golden family had clearly decided it was better to test the waters, to see if forging a connection was possible. Michael, however, didn't know of this. Syria herself was in the dark, but she was already used to receiving guests. All she had to do was at least leave an impression. Though her attitude seemed casual, she actually took this task seriously. Chapter 238 Attendant. Syria leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the armrests of her chair. "So, Sir Mike, where are you from?" Michael gave her a flat look. "Somewhere far from here." Syria's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "That's not very specific." It wasn't meant to be. She let out a soft hum, unbothered by his curt response. "You don't like talking about yourself." Michael didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure if it was just casual conversation or if she was fishing for information. Either way, he had no intention of giving her anything useful. After a moment of silence, Syria tried again. "Magelian, he seems to think highly of you. How did you meet him?" Michael's gaze flickered toward her before he replied, "A coincidence." Syria waited for more, but nothing else came. She sighed dramatically. "You're not making this easy, you know." "I wasn't aware I was supposed to." She chuckled. "Most people would at least try to be polite." Michael shrugged. "Most people aren't me." Syria tapped her fingers against the armrest. "You're really not interested in conversation, are you?" "Not particularly." She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "Then what are you interested in?" Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. "At the moment, waiting." Syria blinked before letting out a quiet laugh. "You're impossible." Michael didn't respond. The conversation, or lack thereof, continued in much the same manner. Syria would ask a question, and Michael would either respond vaguely, deflect, or ignore it entirely. But despite his disinterest, Syria didn't seem frustrated. If anything, she looked entertained. You know, she mused, after another failed attempt to get more than a few words out of him. I don't think I've ever met someone quite like you. Michael glanced at her. I'll take that as a compliment. Syria smirked. You should. Another silence fell between them, but this time, it was a little more comfortable. Syria had learned something valuable. Michael wasn't someone who could be easily drawn into conversation. But he also wasn't outright rude. He was just careful, and that, more than anything, made him interesting. Syria tapped her fingers lightly against the chair's armrest, as if considering her next move. She had been testing the waters, probing for something, anything, that would get more than a one-word response from him. This was surely what her father wanted. Michael, on the other hand, wasn't particularly interested in humoring her. He wasn't here to socialize, and even if he was, he doubted engaging with a noble girl he barely knew would do him any favors. More than that, he had the distinct feeling that the more he spoke, the more likely he was to slip up. Fortunately, there was no real need for politeness, and, to his relief, Syria wasn't demanding it either. Still, he acknowledged that she wasn't annoying. Unlike what he expected nobles to act, Syria didn't seem condescending or arrogant. If anything, she treated his resistance to conversation like a challenge, one she was oddly enjoying. What he wasn't sure of was whether this was how she treated everyone or just a specific group of people. A few moments passed before she spoke again. If you don't like talking about yourself, what do you like talking about? Michael exhaled through his nose. That depends on the topic. Syria gave him a flat look. That's not an answer. Michael's lips twitched, barely noticeable. It wasn't meant to be. Syria let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head. You really are impossible. Michael said nothing. She leaned back, studying him with those sharp blue eyes. Then, unexpectedly, she switched tactics. You know, she mused, I wasn't expecting someone carrying a royal court token to be this difficult. Michael glanced at her. Difficult. Uncooperative. Mysterious. Boring. Michael arched a brow at that last one. Syria grinned. Oh, that got a reaction. Michael shook his head, amused despite himself. Calling someone boring isn't exactly subtle. It worked, didn't it? Michael gave a small shrug. If that's what you need to tell yourself. Syria chuckled, but didn't push further. Instead, she crossed her legs and settled into a more relaxed posture, seemingly content to let the conversation drift. Michael didn't mind the silence. In fact, he preferred it. But Syria's presence was interesting. Just as the silence between them began to settle, a knock echoed from the study's door. Michael's gaze flicked toward it, and Syria straightened slightly, her relaxed posture shifting into something more composed. The door opened, and the steward returned, but this time, he wasn't alone. A figure stepped into the room. The man was elderly but moved with the precision of someone in complete control of his surroundings. He wore a symbolic robe that Michael figured signified something important, though its design was simpler than the extravagant attire of nobility. His gray hair was neatly tied back, and his sharp eyes swept over the room before settling on Michael. His expression remained unreadable, but there was no hostility, only a quiet assessment. The steward bowed slightly. Sir Mike, this is Master Yuan, an attendant of Grand Mage Lian. He has come to escort you to the royal court. Master Yuan inclined his head in respectful greeting. Sir Mike, it is an honor to meet you. If you are prepared, we should depart. The Grand Mage is expecting you. Though his words were direct, his tone held a measure of courtesy, treating Michael not as a mere task but as a guest worthy of respect. Michael stood without hesitation. Syria, however, remained seated, watching the exchange with open curiosity. She didn't seem surprised by the abruptness, nor did she look particularly disappointed that their conversation was being cut short. Instead, she simply smiled. "It seems our time is up." Michael glanced at her. "It seems so." Syria tilted her head. "Will we meet again?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He hadn't planned to stay long in the noble district, but something told him that avoiding future encounters with nobles entirely would be impossible. Instead of a direct answer, he simply said, "We'll see." Syria chuckled, seemingly satisfied with that. Master Yuan, meanwhile, had already turned toward the door. "Come, we must go." Chapter 239 Seventh Prince. The corridors of the noble estate gave way to the open streets, where a carriage awaited them. Master Yuan moved with quiet efficiency, opening the door and gesturing for Michael to step inside. The ride was smooth, the interior of the carriage well maintained, but not overly luxurious. Master Yuan sat opposite him, hands resting calmly in his lap. For a time, there was silence. Then, Master Yuan spoke, his tone measured. "The Grand Mage had expected a word from you days ago." Michael met his gaze evenly. "I apologize. The opportunity to observe the capital was too good to pass up." This wasn't exactly a lie. Compared to obediently staying in the inner city, Michael believed the outer city gave him much more. Master Yuan nodded, accepting the answer without judgment. "The capital is a fascinating place. It is easy to lose track of time when taking it in." Michael merely inclined his head. He wasn't sure whether Yuan was being understanding or subtly admonishing him. Either way, it didn't matter. He had his reasons. Yuan studied him for a moment before shifting topics. "How have you found the city?" Michael considered his words. "Lively, structured." Yuan, however, didn't press the matter. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "Mage Lian spoke highly of you. He said you were unconventional." Michael tilted his head slightly. "Is that so?" Yuan's smile deepened, though it remained unreadable. "It is rare for someone to garner the attention of both the mage and the kingdom's guards so quickly." Michael remained expressionless. He had expected the Grand Mage's attendant to be well informed, but it was another thing to hear it spoken so plainly. "I was simply in the right place at the right time," he said. Yuan chuckled. "A convenient coincidence, then." Michael shrugged. "If you say so." Yuan watched him for a moment, then leaned back. "Regardless, you have made an impression. That is not a small thing in this city." Michael didn't respond, letting the silence settle. The carriage continued its smooth journey through the city streets, and Michael took the moment to observe through the window. The noble district gradually gave way to the towering structures of the inner city, where guards were stationed at regular intervals, and the presence of authority was undeniable. It wasn't long before they arrived at the royal court. The carriage rolled to a gentle stop, and the door was opened from the outside. Master Yuan stepped out first, and Michael followed, his gaze sweeping over the grand entrance before them. The palace was an imposing structure, its intricate designs reflecting the wealth and power of the kingdom. The guards stationed at the gates barely spared them a glance. Master Yuan's presence was identification enough. Master Yuan led the way through the grand entrance, his steps measured and precise. Michael followed, his gaze flicking over the intricate architecture of the royal court. The walls were adorned with elegant carvings depicting historical battles and legendary figures, the floor polished to a meteor sheen, reflecting the glow of enchanted lanterns hanging from the high ceiling. The air carried the faint scent of incense and old parchment, mingling with the distant hum of quiet conversation. Court attendants moved with practiced grace, dressed in uniform robes of deep blue, each carrying scrolls or delicate trays as they hurried through the halls. Maids in simpler attire bowed their heads respectfully as they passed, their presence unobtrusive yet ever-present. Master Yuan continued without pause, his posture never breaking its quiet dignity. The corridors of the palace exuded authority. Tall, gilded doors lined the halls, each leading to chambers Michael assumed were reserved for the influential figures of the court. The deeper they went, the quieter the surroundings became, until only the muffled sound of their footsteps remained. After several turns, Master Yuan finally stopped before an intricately carved wooden door, its surface adorned with golden inlays that shimmered faintly under the lantern light. Two royal guards stood at attention on either side, their expressions unreadable beneath the steel of their helmets. Master Yuan inclined his head slightly to them. "The Grand Mage is expecting him." The guards exchanged a brief glance before stepping aside in perfect synchronization. One of them reached for the door and pushed it open without a word. Michael exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable as he stepped forward. Master Yuan followed behind him, his voice calm. "Welcome to the Grand Mage's chambers." The room was spacious yet not ostentatious. Shelves lined with ancient tomes and neatly stacked scrolls covered the walls, their spines worn from use. A massive desk sat at the center. At the far end, near a wide-open balcony overlooking the palace gardens, stood Mage Lian. But Michael's attention barely lingered on him. Instead, his gaze shifted to the two other figures in the room. One, a man with sharp features. He sat comfortably in a high-backed chair near the desk. His robes, though simple, carried an unmistakable air of authority. He observed Michael with a keen, assessing gaze, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. The other stood behind him, a silent, looming figure in dark armor, posture rigid with the discipline of a trained guard. His eyes were alert, scanning Michael with the watchfulness of a man used to anticipating threats before they even arose. Master Yuan bowed slightly. "Seventh Prince, this is Sir Mike." Michael kept his face neutral, but inwardly, he made note of the title, Prince. He hadn't expected that dot in front of other nobles, where he could afford to be dismissive. Michael felt he had to offer a bit of respect toward this man. A prince? In a place where nobles dominated everything, this had to be a very important figure. Michael didn't think he could treat the other party casually. "Good morning," he said. However, what he didn't realize was that his greeting was far too casual. It didn't take long for him to sense that something was wrong from the silence that followed. For one, why did the guard behind the prince look angry? And what was with the strange expression on Master Yuan's face? Chapter 240 Captain Ortega. Over the past few months, countless rumors and exciting news had been circulating throughout the kingdom. However, among them, two pieces of news had garnered the most attention, both within the kingdom and beyond. The first was the announcement that the old king of Lionheart was stepping down. This was a matter of great significance to the entire kingdom, so it was understandable that it had spread far and wide. And unlike mere rumors, this was a confirmed truth. The second was the Duke of Evermoon's competition, where one of the grand prizes included the hand of his daughter in marriage. Several factors contributed to its widespread popularity, but the most commonly accepted reason was the value of the prize itself. None of this had anything to do with Michael, even though he was somewhat aware of both matters. In fact, he had used the Duke's competition as an excuse for Mage Lian, which was partly why he ended up accompanying him to the capital. As for the kingdom's affairs, Michael didn't spare them much thought. In his eyes, they had nothing to do with him. He just never thought he'd come in contact with the royal family so soon. Michael's casual greeting hung in the air, and for a moment, no one responded. The prince's expression remained neutral, but the guard behind him took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "How dare you?" the guard growled, his voice low and menacing. "You address the seventh prince with such disrespect." "Good morning." He spat the words as if they were an insult. "You should show more deference, especially in front of the prince." Michael's expression didn't change, but he felt a flicker of weariness. He hadn't intended to be disrespectful, but it seemed he had misjudged the formalities. "I apologize," Michael said, attempting to rectify his mistake. "I meant no disrespect, Your Highness." The guard took another step forward, his face reddening. "You think a simple apology will suffice? You should be on your knees, begging for forgiveness." His voice rose, echoing off the walls of the chamber. Michael's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. He had apologized, and that should have been enough. But before things escalated further, Mage Leon intervened, his voice firm but calm. "Enough, Captain," he said, his eyes flashing with a fierce light. The guard's face twisted in a scowl, but he stepped back, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. Then, Mage Leon's mana locked onto everyone in the room, suffocating them. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Michael, however, felt it was like a breeze. He watched, unmoved, as the others struggled. The prince and Yuan only felt a bit hard to breathe, but the guard suffered the most. His face turned red, and he stumbled backward, gasping for air. Mage Leon's gaze never wavered. "I will not have you disrespect my guest, Captain," he said, his voice icy. The room fell silent, the only sound the guard's ragged breathing. Finally, Mage Leon released his mana, and the tension in the room dissipated. The guard collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The seventh prince stood up. "Captain Ortega, I believe you have made your point," he said, his voice firm but controlled. The guard, still gasping for air, struggled to his feet. "Yes, Your Highness," he stammered, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. The prince turned to Michael, a small smile on his face. "Please, accept my apologies for Captain Ortega's behavior. He can be enthusiastic at times." Michael inclined his head. "No need to apologize, Your Highness. I understand my fault." The prince's smile deepened. "I think you do, Sir Mike, and I appreciate your understanding." Master Yuan stepped forward, his eyes flicking between Michael and the prince. "If I may interrupt, Your Highness, the Grand Mage has requested a private audience with Sir Mike." The prince nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Very well. I will leave you to your meeting. Sir Mike, it was enlightening to meet you." Michael bowed his head slightly. "The pleasure was mine, Your Highness." As the prince turned to leave, he glanced at Captain Ortega, who was still struggling to catch his breath. "Captain, I believe you need to compose yourself. Please, take a few moments outside." Captain Ortega's face darkened, but he bowed his head and exited the room, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. The prince watched him go, a hint of amusement on his face. "I apologize again for the unpleasantness. Please, proceed with your meeting." With that, he turned and followed Captain Ortega out of the room, leaving Michael alone with Mage Leon and Master Yuan. Mage Leon gestured to a chair in front of his desk. "Please, Sir Mike, have a seat. We have much to discuss." The seventh prince stood outside the Grand Mage's chambers, his mind consumed by thoughts of the mysterious Sir Mike. Who was this man, and why had the Grand Mage taken such an interest in him? The prince's eyes narrowed as he pondered the implications. He hoped that this unexpected development wouldn't affect the Grand Mage's impression of him. His father, the old king, was stepping down, and this was a critical time for the prince to secure the support of influential people like Mage Leon. The prince's gaze turned to his guard, Captain Ortega, who stood waiting beside him. The captain's face was still flushed with anger, his eyes blazing with resentment towards Sir Mike. The prince's expression twisted in disdain. Captain Ortega's behavior was unbecoming, and his lack of control was embarrassing. The prince's eyes lingered on the captain's face, his disapproval evident. "Captain Ortega," the prince said, his voice cold and detached, "I suggest you compose yourself. Your behavior is unseemly." Captain Ortega's face darkened, but he bowed his head, his voice died with restraint. Yes, Your Highness. The prince's gaze lingered on the captain's face. He would not tolerate such behavior, especially not now, when he needed to present an impressive front. With a curt nod, the prince turned away.